And we can now talk live to Israeli Defense Ministry spokesman Josh Hantman, joining me there in Tel Aviv. Now, your bombing of Gaza is aimed at killing militants, but an increasing number of civilians are dying. Why is this when you have precision weaponry and intelligence at your disposal?
Well, let's be clear. Our objective is not just to kill Hamas militants. In fact, we have a number of strategic objectives. We have to take out these mass storage facilities of long-range missiles that can now cover over half of Israel's population. We don't think that any country in the world would tolerate a situation whereby in the last decade, over 1 million of our citizens have been under constant rocket fire from the Hamas regime. Now, let me point out that recently Hamas has made a decision to actually escalate the situation, which led us to take the decision that it was time we took out the leader of the Hamas military wing, Ahmed Jouabri, and immediately conduct a pinpoint strategic strike on these long-range Fajr missiles that can hit all across Israel.
Pinpoint strategic missiles that are actually killing civilians. I've spoken to eyewitnesses in Gaza on this very channel in the last 2 days saying that this isn't targeted bombing, this is indiscriminate bombing happening.
Well, let's be clear. I've heard my minister say over and over again that we must conduct only the most pinpoint, precise, preventative attacks. I can tell you that Hamas are once again guilty of this double war crime. They hide beneath civilian populations, shooting from within mosques, shooting from within schools, shooting from within densely populated areas at our civilians. So whilst they are putting their own civilians in danger, which by the way does not surprise me if we look at the way the Hamas regime has been treating its own people for the last 5-6 years since they've been in power, hiding behind their own civilians while shooting on a daily basis at our civilians.
Hiding behind their own civilians in Gaza, hiding behind their own civilians in Gaza, it's one of the most densely, if not the most densely populated region in the world. So where can those civilians go when being bombed by Israel in this way?
Well, when Hamas are hiding rockets beneath mosques and hiding rockets and missiles within schoolyards and firing rockets actually next to the very hotel where most of the foreign correspondents are staying, you just have to look at all the reports coming out across the world today. Unfortunately, it's a very, very difficult predicament. And that's why the Israeli government uses the most precise munitions. It's why the Israeli army sends flyers out to the population even before we conduct these precision strikes in order to minimise the civilian damage.
Let's find out what those precise munitions are doing to the people of Gaza. We've managed to speak to several Gazan civilians who are suffering in this bombing campaign at the moment. And here's what they had to say. Let's have a listen.
The civilian population here is densely packed. In every house, there are about 20 people. Until 5:45, everyone was asleep. After that, blasts began shaking this entire area. F-16 planes were bombing innocent, harmless people. Many were injured. My family had 4 injured.
We were listening to the news to find out what's going on in Gaza after these bombings. Yesterday we slept for a while because we wanted to rest, but we woke up in rubble. My brothers were wounded. Thank God all are alive. But what should we do now? The roof collapsed. Walls are destroyed. What did the children who were under the rubble ever do?
We were all sleeping, parents and me with my sisters. An F-16 missile hit our house. We were taken to hospital. Thank God all are alive, but that's how it was.
So what do you say to these people there in Gaza?
Well, first of all, I'd like to point out that actually last night, and every night, but in particular last night, even in the middle of a mission, we had Air Force jets that were flying over and they had a precise target ready to be hit, and the Hamas organization or other organizations in the region brought civilians to the location and we diverted the attack. We are doing our utmost to protect civilians on both sides, while Hamas is going out of its way to not only put their own civilians in harm, but attack our civilians on a day-to-day basis.
You've bombed the Prime Minister's headquarters, which is not a militant target, but the office of a democratically elected representative of the Gazan people. So how do you justify that? That is not a Hamas militant HQ, is it?
So Hamas, let's remember, is a terrorist organisation, recognised as a terrorist organisation by the EU, by the United States, by much of the international community. And if we're talking about a democratically elected organisation, democracy includes a civil state, a state whereby there's a freedom of press, whereby there is free rights for women and freedom of religion and freedom of expression. The fact is Hamas is an oppressive regime, it's an oppressive terrorist organisation that does as much harm to its own civilians that it actually does to our civilians as well.
But then you still were trying to negotiate with this, what you call as a terrorist organisation, to achieve peace. And in that very delicate moment, when it looked like a permanent truce was on the table, your forces assassinated the military commander of Hamas on Wednesday. So it looks as if you don't really want peace.
First of all, you're talking about negotiating with peace. Let's remember that the quartet, which is made up of Russia, the United Nations, the EU and the United States, have very clear conditions for negotiating peace with Hamas. They say Hamas must recognise Israel, which they have not done. Hamas must put down their weapons, which they have not done. And Hamas must recognise all previous international agreements, which they have not done. So let's remember that we actually accept the quartet and the international community's conditions for making peace and for actually talking with the Hamas regime. And it's Hamas that consistently refuse to recognise those conditions.
Could you be possibly sparking off a serious international crisis now, with another war developing in the region, a very volatile region as it is, and putting the Israeli nation at huge risk? This couldn't come at a worse time for the Middle East.
Well, unfortunately, Hamas are completely and utterly responsible for this. We did not choose the timing, okay? Last weekend, there was a rocket fired at a jeep in the heart of Israeli territory. This was followed by a barrage of artillery rockets, of mortars, of missiles. Again, these rockets can hit up to 1 million Israeli citizens.
Yeah, but
Israel
sorry
had
to interrupt,
to respond.
they're not,
Any
though,
other
are they?
country would respond.
These rockets really are not proving to be as effective as, obviously, the barrage from Israel. You've got your highly sophisticated Iron Dome, which is a military defensive system which is clearly working very well. And really, the firepower that is coming in from Israel to Gaza is nothing compared to what's happening coming out of Gaza into Israel. And
well,
you're
I'll
not losing
remind
as
you
many
that their
civilians
rocket
either.
attacks can definitely be deadly. I was in Kiryat Malachi, a town in the south, 3 days ago. In fact, 2 days ago, sorry. And I was witness to the most horrific scenes. A baby covered in blood. 3 people killed in cold blood. While we mourn every loss on both sides, and we genuinely do mourn all the loss of any collateral damage, any civilian populations on the Palestinian side as well, you look at the response of the Hamas regime, of the Gaza government. They were celebrating this. They were celebrating the loss of innocent Israeli life. So I remind you that their rockets can kill. They have killed. And unless we continue to protect our citizens, they will continue to kill.
And Israel is accused of committing war crimes now by the Arab League, and a lot of condemnation from other countries. How do you react to that?
Well, as I said, we seem to have the support of much of the international community right now, who recognise Israel's right to defend itself against these indiscriminate attacks against its citizens. If anyone's guilty of a war crime, it's Hamas, that hides behind the civilian population, shoots from mosques, schools and densely populated areas at our civilians.
So what next? Are you going to launch a ground invasion?
My minister has said very clearly, Minister Ehud Barak, and indeed the Prime Minister has said, that a ground operation is a possibility. It's an option that we must check in order to restore the quiet and the calm to the region. Okay, and quiet and calm is good for both sides.
That was the aim of Operation Cast Lead 4 years ago. And what has that achieved? Apart from, of course, at that time, many civilian deaths in Gaza.
Well, unfortunately, until Hamas realise that indeed we are here to stay and they cannot keep firing rockets at us and at our civilians on a day-to-day basis, we will have to act in order to restore that deterrence, in order to restore the quiet to the region.
Thank you very much indeed. Israeli Defence Ministry spokesman Josh Hampman, we appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Joining us live there in Tel Aviv. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.